6 days at UHWI, the misdiagnosis, a teenager's death, and a multi-million-dollar judgment. A persistent headache, a previous history of meningitis, an unsuccessful diagnostic procedure, then a rapid devastating decline. 6 days after being admitted to the University Hospital of the West Indies, a 16-year-old Campion College student was dead. More than 8 years later, Jamaica Supreme Court has found that the hospital fell below the required standard of care and breached its duty to the teenager. The court identified serious shortcomings in the investigation of meningitis, the response to her deteriorating condition, and the absence of a clearly escalating treatment plan. The UHWI Board of Management has now been ordered to pay more than $9 million Jamaican dollars, along with interest, and $8,000 in expert witness expenses. But the judgment raises questions extending far beyond compensation. Why was meningitis repeatedly considered, but apparently never conclusively ruled out? Why was an unsuccessful lumbar puncture not repeated? And when the teenager's condition rapidly worsened, was the hospital's response sufficiently urgent? This is the story of 6 critical days inside one of Jamaica's leading medical institutions, and the warning the case now delivers about diagnostic discipline, clinical escalation, and accountability. Subscribe today, turn on notifications, and never miss the stories that matter most. Jamaica News Now, your Highlands, your news, right now. A promising life interrupted. The court withheld the teenager's name, protecting her identity even after death. What is known is that she was an accomplished fifth form student at Campion College in St. Andrew. She was described as a perennial high achiever and a polyglot, someone capable of speaking or writing several languages. She was preparing to sit her Caribbean Secondary Education Certificate examinations in May and June 2018. According to the evidence presented to the court, she also had entrepreneurial ambitions and hoped to become either a scientist or a medical researcher. Her parents' lawsuit was therefore about more than the medical care she received. It was also about the life, career, and future they said were taken away before they could properly begin. The first warning signs. The medical crisis reportedly began on March 27, 2018, when the teenager complained of a persistent headache. Her mother said the child felt warm and was examined by the family doctor, who prescribed medication. But the headache did not disappear. By March 30th, the teenager was also experiencing weakness. The development alarmed her parents because she had previously been diagnosed with meningitis at 8 years old. Believing that she might be suffering another episode, they took her to UWI. According to their account, they specifically told medical personnel about her symptoms, previous meningitis diagnosis, and their concern that the disease might have returned. That disclosure is central to the case. The question was not simply whether the hospital immediately accepted the parents' suspicions. Doctors are required to assess competing explanations and reach their own clinical conclusions. The critical question was whether meningitis was adequately investigated before medical personnel moved towards another diagnosis. The Supreme Court ultimately concluded that it was not. Meningitis is considered but not excluded. The hospital conducted blood tests and a CT scan. Medical personnel also attempted a lumbar puncture, commonly called a spinal tap, but the procedure was unsuccessful. A lumbar puncture can allow doctors to examine cerebrospinal fluid for evidence of infection or inflammation. In a patient with symptoms and a previous history that raise the possibility of meningitis, it can become an important part of the diagnostic investigation. According to the parents, they understood that the unsuccessful procedure would be attempted again. However, the court found that the hospital's records referred on 3 separate occasions to the need to rule out meningitis, yet no further attempt was made to conclusively exclude it. Instead, the parents said they were informed on March 31st that their daughter was suffering from a hemiplegic migraine, a rare condition that can cause severe headaches and temporary weakness or paralysis on one side of the body. The existence of symptoms consistent with another condition did not, in the court's view, remove the obligations to properly investigate meningitis. Justice Anne-Marie Nemard found that there was an absolute need for a physician to conduct sufficient testing and detailed investigations before ruling out one disease in favor of another. The court attributed negligence to UHWI for failing to properly use the usual diagnostic tools needed to exclude meningitis, including the lumbar puncture. Based on the evidence of the expert witness presented by the parents, the court concluded that an accurate diagnosis could have been reached if the lumbar puncture had been successfully performed. A devastating deterioration. The teenager's condition worsened rapidly. Over the course of her admission, she reportedly suffered approximately 18 seizures and 2 heart attacks. She was eventually placed on life support. The court found that she was brain dead by 11 p.m. on April 1st, 2018, approximately 2 days after entering the hospital. However, she was not officially pronounced dead until April 5th. Justice Nemar described the speed of the teenager's deterioration during the days following her admission as concerning. The court was also critical of what it found or failed to find in the hospital's approach as the emergency intensified. According to the judgment, there was no clear treatment plan capable of responding to her rapid decline. The court also found no corresponding or commensurate escalation in the course of treatment as her condition became progressively worse. That finding goes to the art of hospital emergency care. A diagnosis made at one point cannot remain unchallenged when the patient's clinical condition changes dramatically. New seizures, cardiovascular collapse, or decline in neurological function should trigger urgent reassessment, further investigation, and where appropriate, escalation to senior specialists or intensive care. The ruling suggests that the hospital's response did not evolve sufficiently as the teenager's condition deteriorated. The hospital's defense. UWI disputed the allegations of negligence. 2 medical professionals who testified on behalf of the hospital maintained that its staff acted in accordance with accepted medical practices. They argued that there had been no negligence in the teenager's diagnosis, treatment, or management. This is an important part of the record. The judgment was not based on an uncontested accusation or an admission by the hospital. The court was required to consider competing medical accounts. Ultimately, however, Justice Nemod preferred the evidence of the independent expert called by the parents. That evidence persuaded the court that there were aspects of negligence on the part of the hospital that were of significant concern. The finding does not necessarily mean that every doctor or nurse involved acted negligently. The defendant in the case was the hospital's board of management, which can be held legally responsible for failures committed by its employees or agents during the delivery of patient care. What breach of duty means. Hospitals and medical professionals are not legally required to guarantee that every patient will recover. Medicine involves uncertainty, and even appropriate care can sometimes end in tragedy. The legal obligation is to provide a level of skill, investigation, judgment, and treatment reasonably expected from competent professionals operating under similar circumstances. To establish medical negligence, a claimant must generally demonstrate that a duty of care existed, that the required standard was breached, and that the breach resulted in legal recognizable harm. In this case, the Supreme Court found that UHWI fell below the required standard. The failures identified included not properly ruling out meningitis despite repeated references to it in the medical records, not repeating or completing the unsuccessful lumbar puncture, failing to sufficiently investigate before favoring one diagnosis over another, failing to recognize that the teenager was brain dead by April 1st, lacking a clear treatment plan as her condition deteriorated, failing to demonstrate a sufficiently urgent escalation in treatment in response to the deterioration. These findings convert the case from a disagreement about the wisdom of one diagnosis into a wider examination of the hospital's diagnostic and clinical management systems. The damages awarded. The court's award was divided into several categories, each addressing a different form of loss. The teenager's estate was awarded $1,687,380.19 for the pain and suffering she endured before her death. $244,127.70 for loss of life or loss of expectation of life, with interest at 3% annually from April 15, 2021 to July 31st, 2026. $6 million in relation to the earnings the court assessed she would have generated during the relevant period. $975,573.41 in special damages with interest at 3% annually from the date of her death to the date of judgment. $8,000 for the medical experts report relied upon in the proceedings. The Jamaican dollar awards total approximately $9.01 million before the applicable interest is added. The damages cannot place the teenager back in the life she was building. Courts use financial compensation because it is the only civil remedy available, not because a child's life can be reduced to a monetary value. The award for lost earnings is particularly significant. It reflects the court's attempt to assess the financial future of a teenager who had not yet entered the workforce. Her academic record, ambitions, and personal capabilities therefore became important evidence of what her future might reasonably have looked like. The unanswered institutional questions. The judgment establishes civil liability in this particular case, but it leaves several matters of public interest requiring answers from UHWI. Was an internal clinical review conducted after the teenager's death? Did that review identify the failure to complete the lumbar puncture or conclusively exclude meningitis? Were any treatment, escalation, or documentation protocols changed? What safeguards now exist when an important diagnostic procedure is unsuccessful? And does UWI maintain a formal system requiring senior review when a child experiences sudden neurological deterioration? These questions are not an invitation to prejudice the conduct of individual healthcare workers. They concern institutional learning. The case began with a headache and ended with a family losing its only child. The Supreme Court found that meningitis was repeatedly identified as a diagnosis to be ruled out, but was never properly excluded. It found that the hospital failed to employ the necessary diagnostic tools, lacked a clear plan during the teenager's rapid deterioration, and did not sufficiently escalate her treatment. UHWI contested the claim and presented medical evidence that its personnel had followed accepted practices. The court disagreed. The resulting multi-million-dollar award provides the family with a measure of legal recognition, but it cannot restore the future their daughter was preparing to pursue. The deeper test now falls to the hospital and the wider health system, whether this judgment will remain only a financial liability or become the catalyst for stronger diagnostic safeguards, clear escalation procedures, and greater accountability when a patient's condition begins to spiral beyond control.